It always feels like bad luck, doesn't it? Like the universe pulling the same cruel joke on you over and over again. Different faces, different names, same ending. You meet someone new. They seem different this time. Better, kinder, more available. You tell yourself, this feels safe. This feels right. This might be the one that breaks the pattern. And for a while, it's almost believable. They text back quickly. They laugh at your jokes. They make plans for next weekend instead of leaving things vague. But then, the small silences start. The shift in tone you can't quite name but feel, viscerally, in your throat, in your stomach, in that tightening behind your eyes when you check your phone and see nothing. Again. And slowly, the mask slips. The same patterns reappear. The distance, the passive aggression, the emotional unavailability, the cold withdrawal right when you start to care. The same emotional games you swore you'd never fall for again. And yet, here you are, playing your part like it's muscle memory. So you sit there, on the edge of your bed, or curled up in the corner of your couch, phone in hand, hot in your throat, replaying the last conversation like a forensic investigator looking for the moment it all shifted, the second where you lost control of the story. And the question rises, familiar and tired, but still sharp enough to cut. Why do I keep attracting people like this? And look, I could stand here and tell you it's their fault, that people are toxic, that modern dating is broken, that you just have bad luck and the world is full of cowards, narcissists, and emotionally unavailable people. And sure, some of that might be true, but we both know that's not the whole story. Because if we're honest, brutally, painfully honest, the common denominator in all these stories, it is you. And I don't say that to shame you. I say it because I've lived it too. I've stood in that same doorway, letting the wrong people walk in, calling it fate, calling it chemistry, calling it anything but what it really was. A pattern, a loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy dressed up as coincidence. Because here's the truth no one tells you. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you're ready for. What your nervous system recognizes as familiar. What your self-image quietly believes you deserve. What your unhealed wounds secretly crave. And that's the thing about broken relationships. Sometimes they're not accidents. They're mirrors, reflecting back to you all the things you haven't dealt with, all the lessons you've been too scared to learn, all the ways you're still choosing safety over growth, familiar pain over unfamiliar happiness. So today, we're going to stop rehearsing the same sad narrative. We're going to ask the harder question, what part of me keeps opening the door for the wrong people? Not to judge, not to self-punish, but to finally understand. We like to tell ourselves it's random, that love or attraction or whatever ghost of affection we're chasing is this unpredictable cosmic lottery where chemistry strikes out of nowhere, beyond our control, like lightning hitting dry ground. But it's not really. Attraction is architecture. Silent, invisible, built brick by brick over years of memory, habit, and emotional conditioning. It starts young, in rooms you barely remember, watching how your parents fought, or didn't, listening to the tone of voice they used when they were disappointed, or silent, learning, almost by osmosis, what love looks like, what closeness feels like, what distance feels normal. You think you're choosing new people, but in reality, you're just following the blueprint. A blueprint written by every unresolved wound, every unhealed moment, every tiny emotional fracture you've paved over with time and distraction. And it plays out in small, almost imperceptible ways. You meet someone at a party. They have that right mix of aloofness and charm. They make eye contact just long enough to leave you guessing. Your stomach flips, not in fear, but in familiarity. You feel drawn in, magnetized. You call it chemistry, but it's not chemistry. It's recognition. Your nervous system clocking something it knows all too well. This feels like home, it says. But home wasn't always safe, was it? And it's not just romantic. It's in friendships, too. You find yourself always drawn to the emotionally unavailable friend, the one who disappears for weeks, only to reappear with some grand, chaotic story that makes you feel important just for being on the receiving end of it. Or maybe it's the friend who never really listens, who uses your vulnerability as a launchpad for their own anecdotes. You tell yourself you're being a good listener, but deep down, you're just reenacting old dynamics where your needs never took center stage. And it doesn't stop there. There's that coworker, the one who reminds you almost eerily of that teacher who never believed in you back in high school. The tone, the subtle dismissal, the way they barely make eye contact when you speak in meetings. And even though you know you should ignore it, you can't help but orbit their approval like a satellite stuck in the wrong gravitational field. This isn't coincidence. It's pattern repetition. It's emotional muscle memory. It's your psyche, walking the same cracked sidewalk again and again. Not because it's the best path, but because it's the only one it knows by heart. And this isn't just psychology. Philosophers saw it too. Schopenhauer, long before attachment theory and trauma bonding became Instagram buzzwords, called this the will to live misfiring. A blind, unconscious force that pushes us to reenact the same suffering over and over. Not because it serves us, but because suffering itself becomes part of how we know we exist. For him, we are like puppets pulled by invisible strings, drawn again and again to situations that scratch the same old wounds. Not for healing, but for recognition. Because sometimes, even pain feels safer than the unknown. And I'm not saying this to make you feel doomed, or broken, or beyond repair. I'm saying it because awareness is the first crack in the wall. And I get it. I really do. I've sat across from people who felt like electricity in my veins, only to realize months later that what I was calling connection was just old fear wearing new clothes. That flutter in your stomach? Sometimes it's not love. It's your body whispering, "We've been here before. And we didn't survive it well the first time." And yet, here you are, reaching for it again. Because that's what unhealed attraction does. It romanticizes familiarity. It confuses adrenaline for connection. It calls unfinished business destiny. And if you're not careful, if you don't pause long enough to name what's actually happening, you'll keep choosing what hurts you, not because you love pain, but because pain is what you've learned to love. And that's where the real work begins, not in fixing other people, but in decoding yourself. And trust me, that's the harder path, but also the only one that leads out. Let's be brutally honest for a second. There's a reason you keep choosing these people. It's not just about them. It never was. It's about you. About that empty space inside you that you've been too scared to name. The one that hums when you're alone. That tightness in your throat when you check your phone and there's nothing there. That ache in your chest at night when the world goes quiet and there's no one left to distract you from. Well, loneliness isn't just silence. It's a question you don't want to answer. Who am I when no one is watching? And when you don't like the answer, when you haven't built a self that feels worth coming home to, you start reaching for anyone who can fill the gap, even if they do it badly. It's not about love. It's about anesthesia. You'd rather feel the wrong thing than feel nothing. And so you look for chaos, for intensity, for that emotional roller coaster that makes you feel alive. Even if it wrecks you, you start confusing intensity with intimacy, drama with depth, manipulation with attention. Because here's the awful truth no one likes to say out loud. Sometimes we pick people who hurt us because being hurt feels more validating than being ignored. We'd rather be devastated than invisible. And this is where Kierkegaard becomes painfully relevant. In The Sickness Unto Death, he talks about something called despair of defiance. It's that moment where, deep down, you know you're acting against your own well-being, choosing people who won't love you right, stepping into situations you know will break you, but you do it anyway. Why? Because somewhere inside, there's a voice that says, if I can't have love, at least let me feel powerful in my suffering. If I can't be seen for who I am, at least let me be seen as a tragic figure. You cling to the narrative of the misunderstood, the emotionally bruised, the chronically unlucky in love. Because that story is still better than no story at all. I know this because I've done it too. I've answered texts I shouldn't have, gone back to people I promised myself I was done with. Let conversations drag on just because silence felt worse. There's a kind of ego that feeds on heartbreak. It makes you the protagonist, the one who loves too much, the one who gets hurt but never gives up, the martyr of modern romance. But what you're really doing is outsourcing your self-worth, letting external chaos drown out internal emptiness. And every time you choose someone emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or incapable of showing up for you, you're not just being unlucky, you're participating. You're co-writing the script. You're stepping into the same role on the same stage with slightly different costumes. And I say this not to shame you, but because no one else will. Because if you don't see this pattern for what it is, you'll spend the next decade calling it bad luck or bad timing or just how dating is these days. But it's not. It's a system. One, your ego is keeping alive. Because deep down, staying heartbroken feels safer than facing the bigger, scarier question, what would I build? Who would I become if I stopped chasing people who can't love me? And that's where the real terror lives. Not in being hurt, but in being responsible for finally choosing something else. And that's what we'll get to next. Let's pause for a second, because here's the part where the story starts to feel less comfortable. It's easy to blame patterns on bad luck, on timing, on all the emotionally unavailable people out there. It's easy to keep writing chapters where you're the hero and everyone else is just another flawed supporting character. But at some point, you have to look at the cast list and ask the harder question, why do I keep hiring the same kind of people for the same kind of role in my life? There's a sentence that hit me once, years ago, and it stayed lodged in my ribs ever since. If every room you walk into smells like smoke, maybe you're the one carrying the fire. And this is where Carl Jung walks in, not as some abstract academic figure, but as the guy who spent a lifetime staring into the parts of the human psyche most of us spend our whole lives running from. Jung called it the shadow. All the parts of yourself you refuse to see, the anger you repress, the neediness you mask with pride, the insecurities you drown under layers of performance and false confidence. And when you don't confront that shadow, when you bury it, ignore it, deny it, it doesn't disappear. It projects. It leaks out in the people you choose, in the patterns you repeat, in the exact emotional messes you swear you don't want, but somehow keep finding anyway. You're not attracting these people by accident. You're calling them in, because on some unconscious level, they match the emotional blueprint you're carrying. If part of you believes you're unworthy, You'll seek partners who confirm it. If part of you fears abandonment, you'll find people whose love is always just out of reach. So you never have to risk fully receiving it and fully losing it. If deep down you think relationships are battles to be won, you'll chase the emotionally unavailable just to prove you're strong enough to crack their walls. And look, I get how brutal this sounds. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't just a victim of my patterns. I was their architect. There's a specific kind of nausea that comes with that realization. The feeling that you've been holding the blueprint this whole time. That every red flag you ignored, every intuition you silenced, every time you said, "But maybe this time will be different." You weren't just unlucky. You were choosing, not consciously, not maliciously, but choosing all the same. Because here's the existential catch. The psyche doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about its own completion. And if there's a part of you that's unintegrated, a shadow part still hungry for recognition, your unconscious will keep dragging you back into the same relational loops until you finally sit down and say, "What part of me keeps inviting this pain?" Jung said it perfectly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what we've been doing, isn't it? Calling it fate, calling it bad timing, calling it all men are trash, or women only want X, or people these days don't know how to love, building these cynical little slogans to cover the real work we don't want to face, looking inward, turning the mirror around, meeting the version of ourselves that made these choices again and again, and asking not with shame, but with ruthless compassion, what am I avoiding? What am I afraid to feel? What would I have to change to finally choose different? Because that's where freedom starts, not in finding better people, but in becoming someone who no longer needs to repeat the same old hurt just to feel alive. So here we are. You've pulled back the curtain. You've looked at the wiring behind the walls. You've faced the uncomfortable truth that, yes, you've been complicit in your own patterns. And now comes the part no one really warned you about. Because the moment you start choosing better is the moment you start feeling worse. Let me explain. For years, your nervous system has been calibrated to dysfunction. Your body has learned to equate unpredictability with passion, distance with desirability, emotional neglect with some twisted version of love. So when someone healthy shows up, someone consistent, honest, emotionally available, your first instinct won't be gratitude. It'll be boredom, suspicion, discomfort so sharp it almost feels like grief, because chaos was familiar. And familiarity always feels like safety, even when it's poison. There's a sentence I once wrote in the margin of a book, somewhere between a late-night realization and a mild existential crisis. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't leaving toxic people. It's learning how to stay with someone who's kind to you, because choosing better means choosing discomfort. The good kind. The kind that stretches you. The kind that forces you to sit still when you want to self-sabotage, to breathe through the urge to run, to let yourself be seen, without performing, without proving, without manipulating outcomes to feel in control. It's awkward at first. You'll overthink every text. You'll look for flaws just to have a reason to bolt. You'll question their intentions, waiting for the inevitable letdown that matches the narrative you've rehearsed for years. But here's where the real work begins. Staying, receiving, letting the unfamiliar goodness land, without editing it, doubting it, or pushing it away. This is where Søren Kierkegaard's voice echoes through the centuries. Not with answers, but with the right kind of question. What is it you truly fear more? Losing again? Or finally having something to lose? Because that's the secret about choosing better. It makes you vulnerable in ways you haven't been in years. Real connection means real risk. And real risk means the possibility of real loss. But it also means something else, something that makes the entire terrifying process worth it. It means aliveness. It means stepping out of your scripted tragedies and into a future that's not pre-written by your past wounds. It means building relationships on truth instead of defense mechanisms. It means loving with both eyes open. It means breaking the loop. And look, none of this is clean. None of this is easy. You'll mess up. You'll second guess. You'll feel like you're regressing some days. But slowly, with presence, with practice, with a kind of fierce, stubborn hope, you'll start writing a different story. One where you're not chasing ghosts, not reliving old wars, not attracting people just to reenact your own pain in different costumes. One where you choose better, not because you've become perfect, but because you've finally decided you deserve better. And that choice, that tiny, trembling, imperfect choice, is where everything starts to change. All right, that's it for today. If this got you thinking, or even if it made you a little uncomfortable, that's exactly the point. Drop your thoughts or your own stories in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think, disagree with, or want to add. Let's make this a real conversation, not just a monologue. If you liked the video, hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear this, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time. Let's think together, not forever, but just long enough to build something real.